Hey guys, what newspaper comics did you like best in the Sunday newspaper as a kid?
The Far Side, Calvin and Hobbes.
Peanuts or Calvin and Hobbes?
Obviously, Calvin and Hobbes.
Also Calvin and Hobbes.
Calvin and Hobbes.
Calvin and Hobbes.
Calvin and Hobbes.
Calvin and
I grew
Hobbes.
up on Calvin and Hobbes.
Definitely Calvin and Hobbes.
Through the decades of comic strips, few, if any, have been able to reach the level of reputation held by Bill Watterson's Calvin and Hobbes. Referred to as the last great newspaper comic, it remains in the hearts of many as a representation of nostalgia and childlike wonder, opposed to some of its former competitors, that of which have succumbed to the ruthless weight of internet culture.
Where did all the hamburger helper go?
However, while some of these IPs have suffered from the meme treatment, they've still been able to find a footing in today's world, living on through the future generations and making millions with movies, merch, and TV shows, even long after the impending decline of the newspaper industry. And in the case of Calvin and Hobbes, they've been able to stay relevant through, Since its creation nearly 40 years ago, Calvin and Hobbes has never officially released any mass merchandise, on-screen adaptations, or, if you can believe it, car decals. The only certified Calvin and Hobbes products are 2 calendars, one for 1988 and one for 1989, a t-shirt for a comic exhibit held at the Smithsonian in 1990, and a Calvin and Hobbes themed elementary language textbook published in 1993, all of which are extremely rare to come across, resulting in extravagant price tags. But for those of us that don't want to take out a loan for a t-shirt, there are the Calvin and Hobbes collections, books that are still being printed that contain Bill Watterson's classic comic strips, meaning the only official Calvin and Hobbes related items for sale within the last 30 years have been reprinted books. From a modern stance, this is unusual, especially in a day and age where anything and everything successful seems to be getting spin-offs, toys, and cinematic universes. And yet, Calvin and Hobbes remains stagnant, despite its common appreciation. To give you a better understanding, just take a look at Garfield, easily the most marketable comic strip character of all time. From video games to plushies to popcorn buckets to alarm clocks to cat food to Funko Pops to tea kettles to telephones to socks to cereal boxes to furniture to a Garfield Xbox. I could go on and on. Through merchandise alone, the Garfield Company makes a yearly income of $750 million to $1 billion. And that's not even including the 3 Garfield TV shows and 6 Garfield movies. As for the Garfield comics, their yearly income averages out to about $17.4 million, which in comparison to $1 billion is literally nickels and dimes. Similar to how Mario isn't just a video game from the 80s, Garfield is no longer just a comic strip cat. Jim Davis was able to turn his cartoon into a money printing machine, diversifying his assets into various industries and forming a multi-billion-dollar company. But more money doesn't automatically make something better. Today, Garfield's comic strips tell another story, as people continuously bash on the quality of the long-running strip.
I gotta say, watching you read Garfield comics on stream has taught me that I think Garfield sucks. I think Garfield's not ever been funny.
It seems as if it's just going through the motions simply to promote its true intentions, merchandising. In no way is this an unprecedented route. It's what's expected from a successful pop culture mascot, capitalizing off of it and taking full advantage of its marketability. Jim Davis did the obvious thing by squeezing every penny he could out of his creation. It's just like when movie studios pump out the same IPs with remakes, sequels, and prequels. They are taking full advantage of that franchise's lucrative opportunities.
I like money!
And some may say, what's wrong with that?
Instead of asking what's wrong with rampant commercialism, we ought to be asking what justifies it?
Bill Watterson's first strip of Calvin and Hobbes hit the presses on November 18th of 1985, being published in 35 papers around the country. 1 year later, in 1986, it found itself in over 250 papers around the world, and at the height of its popularity, it would be in over 2,400. Watterson quickly became one of the biggest names in the industry, winning the National Cartoonist Society's highest honor, the Reuben Award, on multiple occasions, and being put on the same pedestal as some of the all-time greats, such as L.Z. Seeger, Chester Gould, Charles M. Schulz, and the aforementioned Jim Davis. And similar to Davis, with all the newfound success, came the desire to profit off of it. Although, not from Watterson himself, as one might think, but instead from his uppers. The syndicate, also known as the agency behind a cartoonist, knew that Calvin and Hobbes was a hit waiting to be adapted. Movies, TV shows, t-shirts, even Pixar was reaching out for a deal. It was clear that anything with the Calvin and Hobbes names attached would easily fly off the shelves. However, Watterson himself could not be any more against the notion of merchandising his creation. In a stark contrast to the Davis approach, Bill Watterson believed that commercializing Calvin and Hobbes for financial gain would be a detriment of integrity in the comic strip art. In an interview given by Watterson on the topic, he states,
"I'm not interested in removing all the subtlety from my work to condense it for a product. I have no aversion to obscene wealth, but that's not my motivation either. I think to license Calvin and Hobbes would ruin the most precious qualities of my strip, and once that happens, you can't buy those qualities back."
Now, there is a lot of room for discussion on such a topic, especially from the perspective of the fans. Some may see licensing as a way of furthering the reach of an art piece to an unexposed audience, and similarly as a means of keeping that art piece alive and flourishing long after its initial creation. The argument may be made that refusing to license an artistic creation simply predestines it to be forgotten, as the only thing keeping it relevant is the creation itself. But on the contrary, as Watterson strongly voices, licensing could undermine the work altogether, inadvertently turning the strip into a discrete form of advertisement whose primary goal isn't to express and evoke as art does, but instead whose primary goal is to exploit for the sake of profit. A real piece of art that's able to stand the test of time is one that's able to do so without the influence of commercialization. Whether you agree with Watterson or not, you have to give him credit where credit is due, because he stuck to his guns throughout his career. Under his contract with the syndicate, he had no say in whether his work was to be licensed or not. They were free to do whatever they pleased, even fire Watterson, get a new artist, and keep Calvin and Hobbes if they really wanted to. Knowing this, Watterson eventually took the syndicate to court over the matter, claiming they had a cruel and unfair grasp on his work. In the end, Watterson prevailed, resulting in a new contract and full rights to Calvin and Hobbes. Since the beginning, Bill Watterson had always been apathetic towards the unavoidable business operations coinciding with the profession. In fact, it was a large reason behind his retirement, saying that the constant disagreement between him and his syndicate caused him to lose motivation for the passion he once had. That, combined with the overwhelming workload, simply became too much for him to handle. Admitting his Ahab-like obsession overtook the previous 10 years of his life, causing him to conclude his career on December 31st, 1995, with a Sunday strip that perfectly represents the spirit that had encompassed Calvin and Hobbes throughout its existence. It gives a bittersweet conclusion to a decade of a man's work and dedication. Today, Bill Watterson lives a life away from the limelight. Residing somewhere in Cleveland, Ohio, he has not given a public interview nor a public appearance since walking away from the cartoon business. His father, in 1998, had gone on the record to say that
He would like it all to just fade away.
he doesn't get his kicks by being famous. He was just doing something he enjoyed doing.
He's even appeared on Time Magazine's top 10 most reclusive celebrities, ranking at number 7, which I don't even know why this is a list. It's kind of weird, but anyway, Bill Watterson summarizes his departure from stardom best himself by saying, "Enough is enough, and I have enough." But for those who wish to see Calvin and Hobbes live on, is Watterson's choice really the ideal outcome? With no new material in nearly 30 years, we can only wait and see if his art will withstand the test of time and live on as a prime example in standing firm in your beliefs. Thank you so much for watching. I want to hear what you think about this topic. I've always been teetering between if Watterson made the right choice or not. As someone who loved Calvin and Hobbes growing up, I've always just wanted a t-shirt or something, but also I respect his decision, and I think in a lot of ways he is correct. But again, just let me know what you think. I'm very interested to hear in the comments down below. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.